Good. Happy Tuesday, February 8th, everyone. Gordon Causey coming to you again from Little Brighton, Ontario, small town eastern Ontario. Uh, Watching anxiously everything that's going on in our country, and in particular in Ottawa. Was worn out a little bit. Kind of went dark for a few days, just worn out by everything going on. Sure, I'm not the only one. And trying to process everything that's happening. There are two narratives being pushed right now. There's what I'll call the legacy media narrative, and then there's the narrative you're seeing on social media. And trying to keep a even keel on things, trying to be discerning with everything. I will admit my bias right up front that I have less faith, less trust in legacy media, given the numerous times they've been shown to have been engaging in anything, engaging in ways that are not ways that I consider ethical. One prime example, and I've used it before in previous videos, was the manner in which they talked about the desecration of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or the War Memorial, or Terry Fox's statue. And so they used this incredibly pejorative, this incredibly loaded term, desecrating, that the protesters desecrated the War Memorial, for example. Now, what does desecration mean? Strictly speaking, to treat disrespectfully, irreverently, or outrageously. That's so someone climbing up onto the War Memorial is disrespecting it, and there's no question about that. But it wouldn't play as well. It wouldn't frame the narrative as well, to use a more accurate term, and to say, a small number of people disrespected the War Memorial by climbing up on it. That wouldn't elicit the outrageous response. So they want people to be angry at the protesters, and reporting it in a responsible fashion and saying that, a small number of individuals disrespected the National War Memorial by climbing on it. That wouldn't elicit the response that the media wants. So rather, they use a pejorative, loaded term. They say that there were protesters desecrating the memorial, and then they leave it to the individual. You hear the word desecration, and it conjures up images of vandalism, which didn't take place. No one has ever shown any pictures of any vandalism. The War Memorial, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Terry Fox, his statue. As soon as the protesters found out about how, in terms of the Terry Fox statue, some Canadian flags had been draped on it, and one may have even been upside down. And so upon hearing that and seeing the way that the media was trying to frame it, the protesters, from what I understand, went over the top in terms of honoring Terry Fox's statue, laying flowers at it, and putting apparently they have individuals parading or policing in a fashion in front of the War Memorial or the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and asking people telling people to stay off. So rather than desecrating, they're actually honoring it, probably more than it ever has been in history. I'm certain that if you go back to Canada days previous, would not surprise me if in times past certain individuals have at one time or another perhaps ignorant of what the monument means, what it stands for, have climbed up on it for a vantage point or things like that. And they'd simply be told, show some respect, get out. No different now. But big question is what's going to happen now? And there's talk of all kinds of chatter out there. And one of the most concerning, one of the most alarming I find is this concern expressed by some protesters that there may be an effort to have social media go dark. And that would leave only the legacy media to provide images of what's happening, and they can frame it however they want. We've seen what the legacy media has done throughout the course of this 2-year period. CBC News, our national broadcaster, portrayed Edmonton. They're the Edmonton affiliate of CBC News. Showed a picture of a patient in ICU, and some eagle-eyed observers of the news noticed that wasn't a patient, it was a mannequin. And CBC then later apologized. They tried to characterize it as an error in judgment. I find that hard to believe. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were misrepresenting the truth, but it framed the narrative they wanted. So all's fair in love and war. And this is a war for public opinion. So any port in a storm, they're going to do what they can. And the resources that the legacy media have, with the hundreds of millions of dollars that the federal government provides to them, versus however many thousands of people are in Ottawa, it's a David and Goliath struggle, at least in terms of resources that the government and the media have. They have a bottomless pit of cash. The protesters, everyone knows, they raised in north of $10 million. They managed, I believe, to access $1 million of it before those funds were then cut off. So even $10 million compared to the resources at the disposal of the government, of the Ontario government, of the federal government, of the Ottawa municipal government. $10 million is peanuts. And so what's going to happen? I pray it doesn't. I pray things remain peaceful. What the protesters ultimately want, what Canadians ultimately want, at least if polling by Angus Reid is to be believed, a majority of Canadians want an end to mandates. And what does an end to mandates mean? An end to mandates means that we return to the rule of law. We return to our Constitution. We return to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Meaning, look at it in terms of a worship service gathering. That's a constitutionally protected right. And freedom to assemble, freedom of religion. And so now the state would no longer be able to come in and step in and arbitrarily say, you're not allowed to gather. Individuals would be free to go without fear of repercussion from the state. It would mean that an end to this show me your papers society we are slowly sliding toward. Today it's to cross into the United States. And now we have the federal government openly talking about the potential for that same type of restriction to be placed interprovincially. So your Canadian passport is no longer worth the paper it's printed on. And where does it end? And then do we have restrictions? Are you restricted to your own town, your own city, your own village? Where does it end? And the protesters in Ottawa at the crux, at the core of their protest, is a desire for a return to Canadian law, a desire to return to the Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms as the highest law of the land. And you can't just arbitrarily declare an emergency that never ends and abrogate all those God-given rights and freedoms for which Canadian soldiers fought, bled, and died for. This was the type of system that existed in, it's what we fought against in World War II. There was a country, Nazi Germany, was bent on global domination and genocide and subjugating the human population. And Canada, in tandem with other Western, the Allied forces, fought back. People died to preserve our freedoms. And now we have, God bless the truckers for finally providing a catalyst, because a lot of people saw what was happening, saw this slow erosion happening. And some Canadians know their history. People, I know that a lot of people, if you bring up Nazi Germany, 1933, they say, "Oh, it's not like that. There are no concentration camps. We have no death camps. They're not taking people away in cattle cars." And they forget that it wasn't until, I believe it was 1941, 8 years after the Nazis came to power, it wasn't until 1941 that the so-called horribly evil and wicked final solution was enacted in Germany. And another thing that people fail to realize is that Adolf Hitler, who was the Nazi dictator, the Führer, whatever you want to call him, that yes, he was the leader of that country, but he had some very powerful backers. The industrial elites, or call it the corporate world, was behind him. So was the German aristocracy. He was merely there. He was the front man for their agenda. And in my mind, we're looking at a similar agenda right now. But, 1933, 1941, that's 8 years. This all started in 2020, in 2020, over fear of a virus that was supposed to kill minimum 100,000 Canadians in the first year, directly caused by COVID. We were supposed to have, if the best case scenario had played out, even with lockdowns, we were still supposed to be having 100,000 Canadians dying directly due to COVID, which would have put Canada's overall total mortality for the year 2020 in around 400,000. And instead, we had pretty much what was expected, 300-odd thousand. Those are just numbers. You can look them up. How many people died in Canada in 2020? A little over 300,000. How many were expected, forecasted to die before COVID came along? A little under 300,000. Very little excess mortality. How many increased deaths were there due to suicide? How many increased deaths due to drug overdoses? Call them deaths of despair, if you will. Just one end to the mandates. And it's an anxious time. Watch the news. Watch to see, I'm not a big techie type guy. I don't know what kind of tools are at the disposal of the authorities. If they could shut down social media, I imagine it's possible. Cell towers and such in the area be shut down so that the only video evidence going out is from where the legacy media points its cameras. I mean, we've all seen that image where it's a cartoon image, but shows, thousands upon thousands of people with signs calling for peace, unity, love. And then 3 or 4 individuals touting racist emblems and symbols. And the media turn their back to the thousands and they zoom in on those 3 or 4 regrettable individuals. And that's what we've been seeing the media, our legacy media, doing. Is, if you've been paying any attention to social media, you've been seeing people dancing around in circles, women with their young children in little baby carriers around their bodies and dancing around in a circle to "We Are the World," people hugging, laughing, singing, dancing, jumping castles. It looks like Winter Carnival. I've been to Winter Carnival in Quebec City 7, 8 times, and it looked almost like that type of atmosphere, just peace, love, and joy. That's the image you get when you see video from people milling about on Parliament Hill, going around. There's a great article written by a gentleman who works for the federal government who lives downtown, and he went walking in amongst the trucker convoy, not sure, he'd seen what the media had reported to him, and so he was somewhat, trepidatious about going out and venturing into, the heart of the convoy. And what he met were some wonderful people. People will give you the shirt off their back. Canadians, people of every race, every religion, every orientation. People who just want their freedoms back, who just want a restoration of our Constitution, the primacy of our Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And we have a government that is hell-bent not to restore the Canadian Constitution. And I've spoken to this before, but Trudeau said as much during an address to the UN back in September or October, I think it was September of 2020. He made an address to the United Nations by video link, and you can find it on Global News. It's here on YouTube. And he said that the pandemic presents us with an opportunity for a reset, a chance to reimagine economic systems and to fundamentally alter basically the fabric of Canadian society, which he does not have a mandate to do. And our Constitution would not allow him to do it. But by declaring a state of emergency, a never-ending state of emergency, now he's getting to do something he said. He was interviewed before the election in 2015 when he was an opposition MP, leader of the third party Liberals. And he was asked what countries around the world he admired, and he admitted to having a certain degree of admiration for the Chinese system and how their basic dictatorship allowed them to get things done. Democracy is a pain for those with dictatorial leanings, because you have to get the support of a majority of the population. You have to adhere to the rule of law. Whatever laws you bring in have to stand up to judicial scrutiny. They have to pass constitutional muster, none of which any of these measures do. So anyway, pray for Ottawa. Pray that things continue to remain peaceful. Pray that our government goes back to being what a government is supposed to do. Canadians are supposed to be governed, not ruled. You're supposed to have consent of the governed. That's what democracy means at its core, at its most fundamental, basic level. Democracy means consent of the governed. And right now, the majority of Canadians are saying we do not consent to these illegal mandates. And is our government going to stand on democratic principle? Or are they going to use the guise of an emergency that they declared? Are they going to continue to try and use it to subjugate Canadians? So just some random thoughts. Pray for Ottawa. And pray for law enforcement. Pray they choose well. God bless everyone.